11 days. Gas prices went up every single day for 11 straight days, and the President of the United States went on social media to tell Americans that this was actually good news. He reasoned that the United States produces a lot of oil, so when oil prices go up, we make a lot of money. That is the statement. That is the leadership on offer. Not an explanation of what is causing the increases, not a plan to address them, not even an acknowledgement that people filling their tanks are experiencing something painful. Just a reassurance that somewhere, abstractly, America is winning, and you should feel good about paying more. This is the story of what happens when the gap between what was promised and what is actually happening becomes too wide to bridge with anything except the assumption that nobody is paying attention. Start with the gas price promise because it is the clearest example of the pattern and the easiest to verify. Trump told Americans, with the specific confidence he applies to all his numerical commitments, that gas would be under $2 a gallon. He did not frame it as an aspiration or a goal. He stated it as an incoming reality, the natural result of his energy policies and his approach to production. The number was specific. The promise was public. The clips exist. Now gas prices have risen for 11 consecutive days, and the official response is that rising oil prices benefit America because America produces oil. This reframing requires the audience to perform a specific mental substitution. It requires them to replace their personal experience at the pump, the number on the screen when they fill up, the calculation they make every week about whether they can afford a full tank, with an abstract national accounting in which America, as a collective entity, profits from the same price increase that is draining their individual wallets. The people working in the oil industry benefit from higher prices. The oil-producing states see increased revenue. Shareholders in energy companies see their portfolios improve. Regular Americans who drive to work, who deliver packages, who transport goods, who heat their homes, and who pay for everything that gets shipped anywhere absorb the increase as a direct cost with no corresponding benefit. Trump is not wrong that higher oil prices generate revenue in the oil sector. He is doing something more specific than being wrong. He is deliberately obscuring the difference between sectors of the economy that benefit from higher energy prices and the much larger group of ordinary Americans who do not, and then presenting that obscuring move as reassurance. It assumes that people will not notice the substitution. It assumes that the word America is large enough to make individual pain disappear inside national abstraction. Jimmy Kimmel named this accurately. When you promised gas under $2 and now you are explaining that more expensive gas is actually good, that is not a new policy position. That is gaslighting. The specific, precise definition of gaslighting applied to fuel prices, which is the kind of coincidence that late-night comedy does not even need to exaggerate. The gas price story would be serious enough on its own, but it exists inside a broader economic picture that is considerably darker than the social media reassurances suggest. A third of Americans are currently skipping meals or cutting back on basic utilities to afford health insurance, not trimming luxuries, not pausing subscriptions or eating out less, skipping meals. Going without heat or electricity in the richest country in the history of human civilization, in a country whose president regularly describes as the greatest nation ever to exist on Earth, in an administration that promised not just to fix healthcare, but to replace the Affordable Care Act with something far better. The healthcare plan, like so many announced initiatives, arrived with enormous confidence, generated genuine enthusiasm among supporters who believed the problem was finally going to be addressed, and then quietly disappeared once the political difficulty of actually producing one became clear. This is a recurring structure in this administration's approach to complex problems. The announcement comes first, fully formed and specific, promising dramatic improvements by specific dates. The implementation either never arrives or arrives in a form so different from the promise that the connection is difficult to trace. The cameras move on. The next announcement arrives. What makes the healthcare situation particularly sharp in this current moment is the specific image it creates alongside everything else. Melania Trump, at a White House event meant to honor Women's History Month, stood at the podium and described herself in language that included the words visionary, humanitarian, philanthropist, and entrepreneur. The speech was substantially about her own instincts, her own creative process, her own passionate engagement with her work, her own solitude and focus. The occasion was nominally about honoring women more broadly, specifically the struggles and achievements of women throughout American history, but the content was almost entirely about the speaker. This would be a strange choice at any moment. During a period when a third of American women are literally skipping meals to afford health care, it lands in a way that is difficult to describe charitably. The women being honored by Women's History Month are not primarily women who have been recognized as visionaries and humanitarians from platforms of extraordinary privilege. They are women who fought for the right to vote, who organized labor movements, who worked as nurses and teachers and factory workers, who built things with their hands and their time and their sacrifice. The gap between that tradition and an extended self-description from a first lady who has characterized her primary challenge as maintaining solitude and creative focus is not subtle. Trump sat beside her through it, nodding and smiling, apparently finding nothing strange about the framing, which is its own kind of data point about how insulated the current occupants of the White House have become from the texture of ordinary American life. The foreign policy situation adds another layer of contradiction that requires real effort to hold in the mind simultaneously. Military action is escalating. Tensions are rising in multiple theaters. The administration has used language about Iran that invokes the most serious possible framing, describing it as an evil empire whose nuclear ambitions must be stopped. And simultaneously, Iran's soccer team has been invited to participate in the United States for the World Cup, with the invitation framed in terms of wanting to keep the players safe. These two positions are not impossible to hold at the same time, but they require explanation that has not been provided. The country whose nuclear program represents an existential threat serious enough to justify the language of evil empire is simultaneously welcome to send its athletes to compete on American soil, and this is being framed as humanitarian concern for those athletes. The logical connection between these two positions, the framework that makes both of them part of a coherent foreign policy, has not been articulated in any public forum. When that kind of contradiction goes unexplained, the gap gets filled by people trying to make sense of it themselves. Some will conclude that the invitation is a diplomatic gesture that contradicts the hawkish public language, suggesting the actual policy is more nuanced than the rhetoric. Some will conclude that the soccer invitation is a political calculation designed to generate positive coverage that offsets negative coverage from the military escalation. Some will conclude that the two positions exist in separate compartments and that no one in the administration has noticed the tension between them. None of these interpretations are particularly reassuring about the coherence of the decision-making process. The economic data running underneath all of this deserves more direct attention than it is getting from the official response. The futures markets responded positively to one piece of news this week, which is real and worth acknowledging. Markets sometimes move in directions that suggest optimism about specific policy developments, but futures market movements and the daily lived experience of Americans at gas stations and grocery stores and health insurance enrollment portals are measuring different things. A market rally does not make a skipped meal disappear. An energy sector profit margin does not reduce what someone pays at the pump. The persistent confusion between these two registers, between financial market performance and ordinary household economics, is one of the most consistent features of how this administration communicates about the economy. When numbers in the financial markets go up, it is presented as evidence that ordinary Americans are benefiting. When ordinary Americans report that they are struggling, it is presented as a misunderstanding of the situation or evidence of media distortion. This creates a communication strategy that is fundamentally incompatible with the lived experience of the people it is nominally designed to reassure, because the people skipping meals to afford health insurance are not confused about their situation. They do not need better framing or more optimistic social media posts. They need the healthcare plan that was promised to actually exist. The pattern that connects all of these separate stories, the gas prices, the healthcare disappearance, the Women's History Month speech, the Iran contradictions, the market messaging, is a single consistent preference for the performance of success over its substance. An announcement is treated as equivalent to an achievement. A confident assertion is treated as equivalent to a plan. A social media post reassuring people that pain is actually profit is treated as equivalent to policy. This works to the extent that it works because a significant portion of the audience wants to believe the reassurance and is willing to extend the benefit of the doubt across multiple cycles of promised and undelivered. But each cycle that completes without delivery creates a slightly larger gap between the promise and the reality. Each person who skips a meal while waiting for the healthcare plan is a data point in a larger accounting. Each week of rising gas prices under an administration that promised $2 gas is a reminder with a timestamp. Kimmel's mockery of the gaslighting framing will be dismissed by Trump's supporters as partisan entertainment from a comedian with an agenda. That dismissal is both predictable and, in a narrow sense, fair, because Kimmel does have a political perspective, and it is not hidden. But the facts underneath the jokes are not partisan. Gas prices rising for 11 straight days is a measurement, not an opinion. A third of Americans skipping meals to afford health care is a statistic from surveys, not a political characterization. The health care plan that was promised still does not exist. These things are true, regardless of who is pointing at them or what their motivation is for doing so. The audience laughs at the jokes because the jokes name something real, and what they name is the specific experience of being told, repeatedly and with great confidence, that things are fine and getting better, while the evidence available to every ordinary person in their daily life suggests something considerably more complicated. Real leadership, in moments of genuine economic pressure, does not tell people that their pain is actually a sign of national profit. It acknowledges the pain, explains what is being done about it, and provides a timeline that can be held accountable. What it does not do is go on social media and tell people at the gas pump that higher prices mean America is winning. That is not reassurance. That is the assumption that people are not paying attention, and increasingly they are.